Welcome to this IUHPE webinar about the second handbook of salutogenesis. My name is Lenneke Vaandrager, and I'm an Associate Professor Health and Society at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and I will be chairing this webinar. In this webinar, you have the chance to meet all the editors and ask questions or raise discussion points in the chat. So please feel free to do so. We have over 160 people who have registered for this webinar. We also know that the handbook has been downloaded many times since it has been coming out in January. So that's very exciting, I think. So what can you expect in this webinar? We will first start with an overview of the history, context, and aims of the book by Professor Maurice Mittelmark. Without Maurice, we would never had a first or a second edition of the handbook, not only because of his passion for salutogenesis and his rich knowledge of the field, but also because he made many authors enthusiastic to contribute to the book and also kept on gently reminding everyone to finish their tasks. After this introduction of Maurice, we will get a short overview of the different sections of the book by all the editors involved. Professor Claudia Magistretti will guide you through a discussion of key questions for which you are invited to participate in the chat. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And the final part is taken care of Professor Georg Bauer, in which he will explain how you become a member of our STARS Society. And he will also invite you to the pre-conference, which we'll have at the IUHPE in May. At 5:30, I will close this webinar. And one practical suggestion I would like to give you is that you click in the right top. There you can look at the speaker's view and you can watch the person actually speaking. So that would be a suggestion for you to do if you would like to. And of course, I would like to start with Maurice. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
It says I can't start my video because the host has stopped it. You have stopped my video. Hello?
Yes, yeah,
somebody has stopped my video. Okay. Now, hello? Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Excuse me, but
the first thing I have to say is, besides hello, I'm happy to be with you today, is I had this fancy background behind my head, just like Lenneke has, but she was cutting in and out. So I decided to cut out the fancy background to save bandwidth. So just to let you know, Lenneke, that there was a problem a little bit with you cutting in and out. So fantastic to know that so many people have signed up for this webinar. One thing has become very clear since the first edition came out in 2016. There's worldwide demand for books like these on salutogenesis. The first edition has been downloaded over 2.2 million times in part or in whole. That's phenomenal. We'll come back a little later to what that means in terms of the growth of salutogenesis, or how we can interpret that. The very first thing I want you to do is to join me in thanking Georg Bauer, who's a co-editor of the book, and his Center for Salutogenesis at the University of Zurich. Why should you thank them? Many reasons, but among others, they paid the open access fee for this book. Here's the result. The second edition, which only came out a few weeks ago, has already been downloaded in whole or in part over 100,000 times. Of course, you can buy the printed book and it costs about 40 euro. And 100,000 printed books would have cost about 4 million euro. So we can see that there's a very strong equity aspect to open access publishing. If you're planning an academic book and want to know more about our great experience with open access publishing, just send me an email and I'll be happy to chat with you about that experience. So now let's jump in to talk about the second edition. The book is the work of 5 years. It contains the contributions of over 100 editors, authors, and production staff. We're an extremely diverse group from 22 countries: Australia, Austria, Canada, Denmark, England, France, Germany, India, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Kenya, Norway, Poland, Singapore, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates. And the list of interested people from countries around the world is even more extensive than that. At this webinar, there are people from 42 different countries, 27 of which are not in either the first or the second edition. And that tells us that there's a lot of interest that our group has not yet tapped, and there'll be more discussion later on about how you could become involved more actively in helping to grow salutogenesis in the near future. So I want to invite all of you who are listening to help us with the inception, the gestation, and the birth of the third edition of the handbook. What you need to do is start by examining the second edition carefully. Tell us what's missing. Tell us what needs revision. How can we better present the state of theory and research on salutogenesis? Be hard, be critical, be honest. We don't have thin skins, and we really want to expand the range of ideas that are coming into us as we think about how to move forward. If you would like to actively help develop the third edition, great, let us know. Go to the website of the Society and write your comments there, or contact us editors at our email addresses, and they're available in the book. Near the end of this webinar, as Lenneke said, Georg is going to tell you about the Society and the website and how to get involved. Now I want to talk briefly about the aims of the book. What do we hope to accomplish? I've tried to boil our aims down into just 4 bullet points. You won't find these bullet points in the book because there are many more aims and sub-aims than that. But this is my way of summarizing what I consider to be the main issues. First, we want to accelerate theory development of the overall salutogenic model. We want to stimulate even better research on key concepts like the SOC, GRRs, SRRs, but virtually every aspect of the model, because much of it has really been only lightly touched up to this point in the infancy of its development. We're especially interested in stimulating research on processes, the processes that connect life experiences to health, to well-being, and to thriving. Secondly, we want to encourage the sound application of the theory in the home, the workplace, in healthcare, and in society generally. But we also want to encourage a salutogenic orientation generally, even when the formal theory is not in focus. Third, we want to develop salutogenesis to focus even more strongly on positive conceptions of health, in tune with the idea of sustainable, inclusive, thriving in all aspects of daily life. That takes us well beyond the health arena. The last chapter of the book is devoted to this topic, and I hope that you have enough energy and strength after you finished reading your selected chapters in the middle of the first part of the book to actually take in the last part, which is the work of all of us editors and represents the best of our current thinking at this point about how we move to the future. And my fourth bullet point, the last bullet point, is that we want to encourage and support capacity building for the advancement of salutogenesis infrastructure. We're a social movement in a way, an academic movement, but a social movement. And any social development project depends on well-trained and motivated professionals who are given the right tools, who have supportive working environments, and who are connected to a supportive social network. We need to foster these conditions if salutogenesis is to continue to thrive in the decades to come. And all of these aims are taken up in one way or another many different times in the various parts of the book. These 4 broad aims are the backdrop for the remaining presentations in this webinar today, during which I and my co-editors, as Lenneke mentioned, are going to present highlights, some highlights of the book. As you are aware, we have reserved time for interaction with you, so please use the chat space on this webinar to put forward your thoughts and comments. I'm trying to make sure that I go under my 10 minutes a lot of time, and if all of us who are going to speak are as crisp as we can be, we might even eke out a little more time for discussion at the end. We'll see. So I want to conclude my part of the program with a few comments about the first part of the book. It includes a short history, a short written overview by Bengt Lindstro, and it covers major developments beginning with Aaron Antonovsky's tenure as a lecturer in salutogenesis at the Nordic School of Public Health from 1987 to 1994. There's also a chapter written by Georg and me. It discusses some of the main ways the concept of salutogenesis is used by academics today. A main highlight of the book is a chapter written by Aaron Antonovsky's son, Dr. Avishai Antonovsky, and by Professor Emerita Shifra Sagy. Together, they've written a biography with the intriguing title, Aaron Antonovsky, The Personal, Ideological, and Intellectual Genesis of Salutogenesis. I feel that this is essential reading to help grasp the social and historical context in which salutogenesis came into being. There's also a jewel of a chapter written by Hege Vinje, Eva Langeland, and Toril Bull. In this chapter's 16 pages, the authors have managed to survey Antonovsky's voluminous writings with a wonderful level of detail and clarity. I feel this chapter should also be of the earliest reading for anyone coming into salutogenesis. If you're teaching salutogenesis, be sure your students are assigned this chapter among their required readings. I'm serious, I mean that, do it. There's also a chapter early on in the book by Georg Bauer to introduce the Society for Theory and Research on Salutogenesis and other organizations that are important to our field. I imagine all of you listening to this are members of the society, but if you're not, please join, please be active. This is our home. This is the home for we who care about and want to advance salutogenesis, and we need all of you to be actively involved. Last but not least, Lenneke, Vaandrager, and her colleagues from all over Europe have given us a chapter describing 29 years of annual European summer schools and symposia that have been a crucial salutogenesis training ground for more than 750 up-and-coming researchers from over 50 countries worldwide. That goes back to the infrastructure issue that I mentioned when I was talking about overall aims. Okay, I'm just about done. I want to close with just two thoughts. The second edition of the book is the best possible proof I can think of that salutogenesis is really thriving. 43 years after Aaron Antonovsky first introduced his ideas about the origins of health, this progress would be a source of a great deal of satisfaction to our founding theoretician. Antonovsky's life work is the essential pillar for all of us who are gathered in this webinar. We editors hope and believe that we've contributed in an important way to salutogenesis with this book. But only one of the editors is what I would consider to be an essential pillar alongside Aaron Antonovsky. This is what I wrote about that person in the preface to the second edition. Bengt Lindstro stepped into the breach after Antonovsky's untimely passing in 1994. Bengt created and used every opportunity, every avenue, journals, books, conferences, seminars, master's and PhD programs to advance salutogenesis. There's no doubt without Bengt's intellectual leadership and tireless enthusiasm, salutogenesis would have advanced at a much more moderate pace. I'm convinced that this book would not have been conceived and published without Bengt's essential contribution to salutogenesis over the past 35 years. There are two professors of salutogenesis, Aaron Antonovsky and Bengt Lindstro. And with that, I say thank you and go back to Lenneke.
Thank you, Maurice, for your wonderful introduction and nice words. I would like to invite Professor Monica Eriksson to shortly tell something about part 2 and ask Claudia to share her screen. Thank you, Claudia.
So, part 2 is about the key concepts in the salutogenic model of health. For this webinar, I have focused on some new trends in research on salutogenesis. First, the SOC questionnaire are nowadays used in a much wider range of research areas, such as working life, various professionals, and their working conditions. In educational sciences, the salutogenic principles has been seen useful for constructing health promotive learning conditions. Secondly, you can see a tendency to move from only measuring SOC. You can see a tendency to move from only measuring SOC to applying salutogenic principles in health promotion practice. And in many theses today, applying a salutogenic approach, it has been used as a theory for health promotion. And the translation and validation of the SOC questionnaire in new countries continues at the same time as even new salutogenic questionnaires are in progress. And that is very promising. And finally, for the first time, there is a new ontology, health promotion in healthcare, vital salutogenic theories and research, which the book connecting health promotion with many of the related concepts described in the umbrella image. And this book is also a free access at Springer Publishing. Thank you, Lenneke.
Thank you, Monica, for explaining shortly your part of the book. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Professor Claudia Magistretti, who would tell a few words about the section about sense of coherence in the life course. Claudia, go ahead.
You are muted, Claudia. Claudia,
Unmute.
you are muted. We don't hear you.
Apologies, this is a mistake. I'm very sorry for. Sorry. This is about part 3 of the handbook. And this part 3 is on salutogenesis and the sense of coherence in the life course. It's about how we can strengthen SOC in the life course and how it develops in the different periods of life. At present, we know that the SOC, the sense of coherence, develops in a lifelong learning process, and it generally becomes stronger with age, and it is more likely to be influenced at certain periods of life. Moreover, salutogenic interventions, and this is one of the most exciting chapters of this section. Sorry, now it doesn't move, now it doesn't move, can be changed. Sense of coherence can be strengthened by different interventions, and we know what the criteria are that interventions do have to fulfill in order to possibly improve health of people by strengthening the SOC. Several chapters in part 3 of the handbook are dedicated to the development, function, and effect of the SOC in different periods of life. The chapter gives a comprehensive overview on current evidence on SOC in children and families, in adolescence, and in older age. It also shows how these stages of development can be framed in a salutogenic way and can be understood in a salutogenic way. I quote 2 authors: when you start to think of adolescents as individuals who are eager to explore the world, to acquire competence and to struggle with challenges and difficulties, you will no longer develop programs for vulnerable groups at risk. Or you achieve a change of paradigm also when you ask different questions about older age, as the authors below suggest, when they say it is not important how old we are, it is how we are old that matters. And these are changes we already have in many for many periods of life. But in other ways, we have still many white spots on the landscape of the SOC in adulthood. It seems that even salutogenesis research perceives the adults as performing people and not as developing individuals. Up to present, salutogenic research focused on adults' roles in workplaces, in families, in communities. They were not considered as the current understanding is as adults in development. Development in adulthood is understood as a series of transitions that build up on each other and that go back to childhood. This way to understand adult development has not been widely depicted in salutogenic research. In this, and this would be important because we know that transitions are crucial for health, mental and physical health. In this handbook, we have two chapters that tackle these transitions. One is about the transition from young adolescence to adulthood, and the other is about the transition from middle adulthood to age, the sixth decade of life. These authors explore the role of the SOC and the general resistance resources in a transition from in these transitional periods, and they provide first knowledge and first insights, but they also open questions. And with these two questions, I'd like to close this now. The first question is, how can we understand the development of the sense of coherence in transitions of adulthood, and how can we strengthen groups with a weak SOC in periods of transition by salutogenic interventions? Thank you. I give back to Lenneke.
Wonderful, Claudia. Really beautiful questions and nice to hear about your section. I would like to invite Professor Shifra Sagy to tell something about the part about salutogenesis beyond health. Shifra, go.
Thank you, Lenneke. It was 40 years ago that Aaron Antonovsky enriched us with his unique model of salutogenesis. What we usually forget is that the basic philosophical assumption about the world of his new paradigm, the new paradigm, was that human environments by their very nature are stressor-rich. The normal state of human organism is one of entropy, of disorder, of chaos, disruption of homeostasis. It was this basic philosophical assumption that led him to think about the mystery of health rather than the causes of illness. He always asked, how come anyone ever makes it? This was 40 years ago. Coming to our days, it was 2 years ago that we witnessed this philosophical assumption of Aaron about our basic human existence in the world to have been realized, and in a very extreme way. The worldwide outbreak of the COVID-19 has indeed shaken up our lives and transformed perceptions about normality. The pandemic has been broadened its impact from the medical to social, economic, and political spheres. It seems that we are all on the same river that Antonovsky spoke about, with different boats, of course. And we all look for ways to find some order out of the chaos. This is the core of salutogenesis. The COVID-19 has indeed stimulated us to conduct a salutogenic-oriented interdisciplinary research by members of STARS from about 12 countries. We look for the salutogenic resources, especially sense of coherence and national senses of coherence that enable people to cope with this world crisis. Some of our interesting results are presented in chapter 22 in our sector, in my part. We wrote it, I must admit, while we were still in the beginning of the pandemic. And unfortunately, we continue now the research until these days. And you are very much invited to read and to respond. As for the whole part of salutogenesis beyond health, I first have a small confession to make. Aaron Antonovsky was my mentor in writing my doctoral dissertation, which was the first to be written using the framework of the salutogenic paradigm. And I was, of course, lucky to witness the genesis of this pioneering paradigm and later on to take active part in its development. When Aaron passed away 25 years ago, I wondered whether and perhaps how the model would be developed after him. And today I'm deeply excited to witness the rich developments of the model. The second edition is even more impressive in showing these new developments. And I was especially excited to edit the part that deals with some new creative advancement of moving beyond health. It was very tempting to continue Aaron's way by using his strict guidelines for salutogenic research in the boundaries of health and disease. However, Aaron also taught me that it is wise to see models, theories, constructs as heuristic devices, not only truths. So the chapters in our part, the first part, represent good examples of following this wise advice of Aaron and discuss possible applications for different areas beyond health. In chapter 24, Rusha Mas and her partners discuss the different possibilities of application of salutogenesis in politics and public policy. Very interesting chapter. In chapter 26, Kolembieski, I hope I announce it well, suggests us to add another domain, very interesting domain in our life to be viewed through the salutogenic lens, architectural design. He offers ideas as to how architecture can advance comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness in our life. And in chapter 21, my colleague Adi Mana and I ask how to introduce social concepts in the salutogenic research like tolerance, openness toward the other, etc. So as a woman who has lived all her life in a conflictual area, I would suggest the salutogenesis paradigm to be a meaningful conceptual framework in conflict studies and explain some of the worldwide problems created by the current political and social climate in these days. I hope you will have a good experience in reading this part of the book.
Thank you very much, Shifra, for elaborating on your part. I would now like to have a little discussion with Georg for the next part of Professor Georg Bauer. Georg, what do you particularly find interesting about your book section? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. Lenneke, my section is about applying salutogenesis in health promoting settings in terms of Ottawa Charter. That would be the places where we learn, work, laugh, and play. So I would always say, Shifra, not only places with a dangerous river of life, also often a quite joyful river of life. I think we have always both in our lives. Now, the interesting part is that I really would recommend you to read these chapters all together, because only in their combination you can sense how powerful salutogenesis really is as a broad theory, which can be applied to such diverse settings, reaching from very informal communities and neighborhoods towards more formal settings, such as companies, schools, universities, even the military setting we cover in this chapter. And last not least, more the natural environment, which certainly is also very important to our well-being. And when you read across this chapter, you will observe two, let's say, main strategies this authors use. The ones really use more salutogenesis as a starting point, as a guide, a theoretical guide to guide their practice. And so they really found their practical programs very well, I think, and anchor that very well in the salutogenic theory by really looking more into resources, how they can enhance for positive outcomes. And then there are others, and often even the same person, can really dig more into the scientific side and really show how can we use salutogenesis as a higher order framework to better understand theories which have been developed outside of salutogenesis. For example, theories related to the depletion and building up of resources, as it's very much used, for example, in the field of occupational health sciences, but also in the context of restorative environments. And how can these smaller theories be better interpreted and becoming more meaningful also for practice when I plug them in and relate them to the larger salutogenic theory? So I think that's really what you can get out of this section.
Wow, wonderful. And what is the biggest change actually since the first edition?
Yeah, I mean, we had this really great pleasure that Avisha Antonovsky suggested to write a chapter on the military settings. Now, when I heard that first, my alarm bells went on and said, military and salutogenesis, how should that go together? But the people who are so lucky as we are, he is actually part of our global working group on salutogenesis. We know that Avisha certainly is taking a very purposeful approach to doing so. So when you read his chapter, he really starts out with a very thoughtful personal account how he even ended up doing research in this field of military. And then he states, and I quote now, "The work I do there is intended to reduce moral and mental injuries and strengthen humane and social values among military personnel." So I think this really deep value base, I think, really comes out of this chapter. And certainly Avisha is also a great researcher, so it really shows how this theory can very strongly and specifically guide his development of trainings and support systems in the military that really with young people survive well this very stressful period and even grow well through that by really offering always interventions which are strengthening the comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness of their mission. So overall, I think this chapter really provides a great inspiration how we can really fruitfully use salutogenesis, even in very challenging situations, but by being also clear about our value base.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you very much. I would like to continue then to Professor Jürgen Pelikan to tell a few words about salutogenesis in healthcare settings. Jürgen, the floor is yours. You're muted, Jürgen. And also disappeared. Jürgen, can you unmute?
Don't hear you.
But Len, can you unmute Jürgen?
Yes, I've asked him to unmute, but he has to do it on his end as well.
There's a button on the very left-hand side on the bottom, Jürgen, where you could unmute. Lenneke, should we go on?
Yes,
No, sorry.
Oh, no.
There, okay,
No.
go ahead.
Yeah, part 6, integrating salutogenesis into healthcare is a specific challenge for healthcare, but also for salutogenesis. Most healthcare settings, or the disease care system, as Aaron Antonovsky called it more correctly, still primarily follows the pathogenic paradigm. Therefore, how can the disease care system be salutogenic, you may ask? The Ottawa Charter quite some time ago already demanded to reorient health services, but this has only happened to a rather limited degree up till now. Therefore, reorientation has just been reiterated as a priority by the WHO Directors General's opening remarks at the 150th session of the Executive Board a few days ago. For reorientation, health promotion interventions in the health system are necessary, and Antonovsky has offered salutogenesis as a theory for and salutogenic orientation as providing a direction and focus for the field of health promotion. In healthcare, the paradigm of salutogenesis can be used in principle in two purposes, either to guide health promotion interventions in healthcare practice or to reorient healthcare research. Of the three quite different conceptual forms of salutogenesis in healthcare practice, mainly the concept of salutogenic orientation and the construct and instrument of the SOC, mainly in research, have been used, but not yet the salutogenic model. Using salutogenic orientation in healthcare means to focus on salutary factors and well-being. At this point, I just want to remind you that at the 10th Global Conference on Health Promotion in December 2021, the Geneva Charter for Wellbeing has been issued, highlighting the importance of salutogenic factors in health promotion. There, the notion of well-being society is offered, and we could strive to establish a well-being-oriented healthcare system as well. Thus, a salutogenic orientation in healthcare means to be reoriented at well-being and not only at risk factors, to focus on all aspects of a person, including physical, mental, and social factors, instead of just focusing on a diagnostic category, and that not only for concerning patients, but also for their relatives and for staff. For that, the general resistance resources of people must be considered and strengthened if possible. But how can the SOC be introduced into healthcare? Oriented at the three subdimensions of the SOC, healthcare settings can be designed to offer roles which are comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful for its incumbents, be it patients, relatives, visitors, or staff. But of course, the SOC, for example, of patients also can be measured and considered in treating and communicating with patients. It even can be tried to strengthen the SOC by interventions. But why is healthcare also a challenge for salutogenesis? Healthcare and its quality discourse are dominated by the dictum of evidence-based measures to be implemented in its practice. Therefore, salutogenesis has to offer evidence-based and evaluated interventions to be accepted for decision makers in healthcare. Fortunately, our second edition of the handbook can offer quite a number of research findings and tested interventions already fit for implementation in healthcare services. Therefore, if you are interested to find out what salutogenesis means in more specific settings of healthcare, and what we already know on implementing salutogenesis in these settings, you will find information on this for the following settings: hospitals, primary care, mental health care, vocational rehabilitation, residential care, midwifery practice, birth, neonatal and infant care, as well as for community-wide mental health promotion. already in the second edition of the handbook, and you find it in this handbook for more settings than the first one. But if you are for yourself but if you are yourself a specialist on healthcare settings not yet included in this section, like healthcare for specific diseases, for example, in relation to corona or other specific services, you are invited to contribute concerning salutogenesis in this specific setting in the third edition of the handbook. With that, thank you so much for your kind attention, and I hand over to Lenneke. And I'm sorry for the problem at the beginning.
That's no problem, Jürgen. I'm happy that you could tell about your part. Thanks. Then going to the professor of salutogenesis, Mr. Bengt Lindstro. What in your part were new insights of the section that surprised you?
First of all, I was surprised that we could verify Aaron Antonovsky's thought that salutogenesis and the salutogenic model is universal and can deal with diversity. I had the honor to edit a chapter that deals with challenging society circumstances and environments. Just like Aronofsky's original study, we go into very special areas, and we take also a journey around the world from sub-Saharan Africa and over to Canada. And we are ending up in prison. The last chapter is about prison here in this section. But it's actually a cavalcade of many, many different, 6 different sort of aspects. And I tried to find an idea of how can I conclude this, and or find a common denominator for this, and it was difficult. I end up with saying, yes, we verify Aaron's model of universal approach and also diversity, and it's impressive what our contributors have been able to bring up, and that is about what I can say. Go in there and see how we can work with care of dementia, how to deal with recovery after grand disasters. It's a Canadian example, and mental health by Aaron Antonovsky's son has written a chapter about that. And then, as I said, we end up in prison, which is like monopoly here. Okay, but I'm really happy we can go so far and into such a diversity. And before I finish these few words, Aaron Antonovsky was always challenged, saying that he's only dealing with his friends and in Scandinavia, and there are no other sort of studies. Today, we already heard that we have more than 50 translations of the questionnaire. And that means that if you think of Anglo-Saxon countries, we have at least can double up that number easily of where salutogenesis is being studied. Okay. And
but you probably also had some new questions coming up.
Well, still, always when we write too much about the pathology. We should emphasize even more the salutogenesis and the salutogenic approach. And I also want to see new articles, scientific articles written where you don't have to spend 7/8 of the article by explaining what salutogenesis is. It should be evident today, after all these years, that it's something we can understand. But it also gives a warning to us: don't go too fast, because there are many people who don't know about it. I'm happy we have so many people who are not sort of registered as salutogenic researchers here. And finally, I want to say, well, we can today actually take a journey into planetary health and use the salutogenic, go on a really broad perspective beyond human beings and human organizations. On the other hand, we can actually look at salutogenesis before life begins in intrauterine communication and bring perspectives to that. And we are later also presenting a new concept, sense for coherence, which we are trying to develop. And the last thing I want to say here is that Maurice was so kind to me when I started. There's another person whom I want to say thank you at least as much as Maurice said to me, and that's Monica Eriksson. Thank you, Monica, for coming on the ride in the beginning. It was like riding a wild horse without the saddle and anything. And you stayed on for a very long time. Thank you, Monica. And thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bengt. Okay, just before we'll go into discussion, I already see quite some already nice questions in the chat. I also was going to tell you a little bit about the part I looked at, which was the final part of the book. And I know that some people also contributed to that are online, like Avishai and Eva, who wrote some very interesting work. We had some questions in my part about do we now much more need longitudinal type of studies, especially when we are looking at approaches or interventions where we try to strengthen the sense of coherence and how to measure that. And a very interesting part was about qualitative research, I think, in my section, and to see can we do that in a qualitative way, and do we then measure something differently? So very nice chapter to look at several authors who actually try to do that in a qualitative way. Another question in the part discussed is about the teaching and training of health promotion and health professionals. And in that respect, I would really like to mention also that this summer we will celebrate the 30th ETC summer school in Valencia, which was once set up by Concha Colomer, where we really also use the salutogenic training, the same as Eva Langeland has been writing about, and which is very much practiced in Sweden. I think there's much to learn there. Or about the digital work, a part in my chapter which was written about, and that it's wonderful that in this actually webinar we're all together online and we can all share, but that you can also wonder, do we exclude people because of the of actually the whole digital world? So important questions there. And as Maurice also said in the final chapter, it's very nice where we think about this salutogenesis for thriving societies, and let's see if we get there one day. So it's wonderful if in the end we will get there. And at this point I would like to give the floor to Claudia, who will actually look at the questions in the chat and also get us through this part of the discussion. Go ahead, Claudia.
Thank you, Lenneke. Yes, and thanks to all of you who have already put questions into the chat. I will start asking them directly to the people of the editors board I think could be interested in answering them, but please, all the others on the board, join if you have to add or to contradict to a question or to an answer. So please let me start with the first question we received before even the webinar of today started. It is a question to Georg Bauer, and it goes, it's also in the chat now. It has been shown that the traditional governance methods, pyramidal hierarchy, do not correspond anymore to the needs and values of the young generation and bring about psychosocial risks. These risks, well known since more than 30 years, continue to increase, and one factor explaining this lack of control on this epidemic is probably linked to the traditional governance methods. New types of governance, such as holacracy, for example, are promising to promote better working conditions and better economic performance. It's suggested that this topic should be discussed in the handbook, but I think we could discuss it right now. Georg, if you would like to start with your opinion on this statement, please.
Okay, yeah, thanks for posing this question. I think it really relates to two levels. The one is within organizations. I fully agree that lately people are much more talking about agile organizations with flatter hierarchies, where also holacracy, a kind of system where decision-making power is more distributed in the organization, can play an important role. I think, as always, when you introduce such things in a company, you need to be very careful to do it stepwise and to really learn to deal with these new types of approaches of decision making, because otherwise people could easily be overwhelmed. But that shouldn't prevent us of trying out much more creative ways of reducing hierarchies and distributing participation in a company. And certainly it makes a lot of sense from a salutogenic point of view. As you all know, Antonovsky had predicted or assumed that really participation is a key driver when I can really influence my living situation for meaningfulness. So I think that's for sure something we will need to take up on this level of organizations. The same would be true on the level of societies, where I fully agree that the COVID crisis has not been handled in a way where it has been really involving citizens in developing good solutions. A lot of things were implemented top down, and I think, again, participation would have helped here a lot.
Thank you, Georg. Any additions from anybody else of the co-editors?
This question.
Claudia, you're muted.
Unmute.
Sorry, there is a question about the emotion of shame. I will go back to this afterwards. So the next question, I would like to group two questions to Shifra, please, because there is a question on how can we work in the context of human rights violations, and following Georg's statements, even though we have to strengthen participation, we also have to build politics and policies, national policies. And in this context of human rights violations, but also beyond, how can we apply the salutogenic framework to national and sub-national level of planning, policy planning, and also health planning? Is the question clear, Shifra?
You're muted,
Unmute.
Shifra.
Unmute.
Yes, we are all in the same the same mistake. Thank you for the question. But I must say that I'm not political scientist, and I don't deal with policies, political policy. What I speak about is about the sense of national coherence, and how what we found together with Adi and Anan. I saw them here, my colleagues and friends. We found that the stronger the sense of national coherence, the less we are open to the other, the more we are strict to our group and to our in-group, and less we are open to the other narratives, to give some empathy to the other, to give some acknowledgement of and legitimization of its narrative. And we were actually, surprised a little bit by these results that we found, because we think about a sense of coherence. It's something that brings some goodness and some good values, but it is not connected to this. I think Aaron said it many years ago. Don't connect, this was his warning to me, don't connect a sense of coherence to values. As about to think about policy, we can think about, as I said before, I'm not political scientist, but we can think about how to develop sense of national coherence, which means, what does it mean, sense of national coherence? That we have a strong meaningfulness for our nation. We feel meaningfulness, we feel some comprehensibility and all the other components of this sense of national coherence that we have to try at least to develop sense of national coherence that will be more open to the other and not only when the content is only about our nation. We educate people that their strong sense of national coherence is connected to their in-group and to their nation. But we need to put a special effort, and we are now developing projects about this kind of education to develop such sense of national coherence that will be strong, but will be also open to the other and not only concerning inside and group, the in-group, also open to the out-group. But how to do it? We are now trying to think about it. And when I have some answer, I will be glad to share it with you. But now I don't have any answer.
Thank you, Shifra. You said it's important to strengthen the sense of coherence without narrowing the sight or the horizons of people, what can easily happen in groups. There is a question related to strengthening the sense of coherence, and I would like to forward this question to Bengt Lindstro, who already mentioned a sense for coherence, maybe also other subjects you mentioned well correspond to this question. It is, as we have enough evidence about the positive effect of sense of coherence on health, well-being, quality of life in everyday settings, healthcare settings, and so on, how can we strengthen SOC with individuals? Especially such research would contribute to sustainable health among individuals in all contexts. Thank you for clarifying this, if it's so easy to be clarified, Bengt.
Yeah, I wonder, can it be clarified? And what was the precise question, really?
Was it too long? How can we strengthen the sense of coherence?
I think if I was to start to do this, I would start with trying to strengthen the early period of life, because we know that it's in this period we develop this, which means that we have to deal with children or unborn children and parents and the dialogue there, and make the conditions for this ideal. The early period of life, I definitely think, is the starting period. If you have a child, you have all opportunities, all chances to make it right. And why don't we do that? Why don't we put even more energy into early life, into motherhood and fatherhood? I think this is where I would start, and I think this would really have impact on the whole world if we start there. Mm-hmm. This is sort of the human and living part of it, but how do we create environments where these things can happen? That's also one thing we respond to very much in this book. How do we create this kind of thing? And there, our concept that we launched about 10 years ago, but haven't developed too much, is sense for coherence. How can you actually develop this into something different? And also the thing we are doing with in a project in this group is how do you actually make communication from the individual to society, what it is based on, and what is the dialogue, and what are the components of this dialogue. I think there we are going to find good nuances, but it's all sort of coming. We are not there yet. That was a complex answer to a complex question.
Yes. And maybe, since it's a complex question, somebody would like to add a viewpoint on this point from the board.
May I?
Please.
I mean, when we talk about the salutogenic model, we often focus very much, maybe too much, on the sense of coherence as one key element. But certainly many others here in the group also agree that we also need to look more into the sources of a sense of coherence, certainly which would be within childhood. But basically, I mean, it's always this interaction between stressors, general resistance resources, and the sense of coherence, where the sense of coherence helps me to identify, mobilize, activate important resources. So my answer to this question really would be really helping people to enrich their resources in each life stage across all life stages, and really doing it from a bottom-up way of crafting. This is a very emerging concept where people can proactively shape their own living environments and make it more resource rich. But certainly there are limits. I also must have the opportunities, which are very unequally distributed. And so in addition to that, we would go back to the old Ottawa Charter, strengthening resources in the different settings where we live. And yeah, basically that would be a short answer to that question, I hope.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure to whom to put the next question before I will have one for Lenneke and Jürgen also. Maurice or Monica or both of you. There is a question related to the question of the sense of coherence and strengthening it and measuring it. And this question is, why do we allow sense of coherence to connect with disease and sickness? In many studies, we can see that the sense of coherence is used to evaluate diseases rather than the health aspects. Many studies actually show the negative tendencies. For example, low SOC is associated with more illness and disease. Shouldn't we be careful to conduct such studies? So I don't know if it's Monica, Maurice, or somebody else who wants to answer.
Well, Monica, are you raising your hand to do something? All right, then I'll say something about that. Some years ago, a colleague and I, Tora Bull, were very, very taken by this question of the kinds of outcomes that appeared in the salutogenesis literature. And we noted, as many others have noted, that a tremendous proportion of the research actually had disease outcomes and disability outcomes. And the question was, why was that? And of course, the practical answer is the research goes where the money is. And there are very few institutions and agencies that are interested in funding serious and large-scale research on good outcomes, such as happiness, thriving, and so forth and so on. Our point of view was to say, well, you know, this literature in which there's a lot of effort and energy on disease and disability actually isn't that far away from what Antonovsky himself thought was the right way to define health. And so in a sense, it had come further from Antonovsky's own conceptions. I won't go into what those were, but he was interested in the idea of health being freedom from diagnosis, from treatment, from pain, and so forth and so on. We concluded, and I still feel the right conclusion is that health is what a well-defined, what a researcher defines as health in a well-defined way for a particular research project. And I think that Georg, Bauer, and many of us would say that what we need are researchers who are ready to go forth with very well-constructed definitions of positive aspects of health. That's how it's going to come into the literature. If we simply keep saying to ourselves, oh, it's too bad that we're not focusing more on positive outcomes and positive aspects of health, let's do something about that. Well, yes, let's do something about that. And we do something about that by operationalizing these positive ideas and then conducting high quality research on them.
Thank you very much, Maurice. And talking about linking impossible things to each other, I would like to have a question to Lenneke, who is Lenneke Vaandrager, who is linking most unusual things in very coherent ways to salutogenesis. And the question is about negatively valued emotions, such as shame. Can they be interpreted as warning system in the sense of positive deviant behavior is the more specific question. The more general part of it is that Helen Claude Meier has presented an approach in this direction, and she wrote a book about the bright side of shame, which could also be made fruitful for other emotions. Could you think this could be possible? And if so, where could we sort of apply a more salutogenic thinking to so-called negative emotions?
Ooh, that's a difficult question.
You can give it, you can pass it on. If you don't like it, pass it on.
Yeah, if if it rings a bell for someone, I think it's very much, at least it's also how we frame these type of thinking. And I think it's very important to at least start talking about it and sharing ideas. That's the first start. And also, is it really shame, or do we define it as a society as shame? So I think that's an important aspect. But please, if somebody else has a wise answer, go ahead.
I think this is a wise answer. Thank you, Lenneke. Maybe to add a detail, we wrote about stillbirths and salutogenesis. And one thing about health in salutogenesis is the continuum. And you do not have good or bad emotions, but you have a continuum of a whole lot of emotions. And you do not have a right or a wrong way to deal with emotions, but you sort of have different approaches. And this is, I think, one of the main qualities of salutogenic theory. It's not setting norms. And this is very important also in the context of values, as Shifra mentioned. And values are very much linked to the next question, to Jürgen. You talked about salutogenesis in the healthcare system. And there is, especially in the German-speaking countries, quite big closeness of a so-called alternative medicine and salutogenesis. The question I give you from is, what are the relationships between complementary healing methods, such as homeopathy, acupuncture, body therapies, and yoga, and the concept of salutogenesis? Because in German-speaking countries, the term salutogenesis is increasingly used as a synonym for so-called alternative, unconventional, complementary healing. From my point of view, this is from the chat, the procedures have in common that they want to promote and favorably influence auto-regulatory processes, as they are also indispensable for the production of health. What do you think and what do you comment on these reflections, Jürgen, please?
Yeah, unfortunately, my wireless is not very good at the moment, and I only took part of your question. But you see, I think all this alternative medicine is very interesting in the moment concerning COVID. There is a hypothesis that, especially in the German-speaking countries, where alternative medicine is stronger and homeopathy is allowed and things like that, there are more people who are fighting against the measures, the public health measures of COVID, because they don't believe so much in the science on which our COVID understanding is based. And I think that is a very interesting point, because the vaccination rate, and especially in the German-speaking countries, is lower than in many other countries. And the question is there a connection between these doubts in scientific medicine and the belief in other kinds of medicine? That is the first reflection I have when I hear the question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you.
But maybe somebody else has an idea on that.
I can add something about it, because we found that there is no correlation between a strong sense of coherence and vaccination. But I think it's a mistake to look for this. To look for that someone with strong sense of coherence will adapt such way of dealing with the, as I called it, the chaos of the pandemic. Strong sense, a woman or a man with strong sense of coherence will find his or her way to cope the best for him, the best way for him or for her to cope with the pandemic, with all the chaotic situation and all. It's not only the health problem, it's the social problem, the political problem. And the strong sense of coherence will enable you to find your way. If your way is to practice yoga, for myself, to practice yoga, give me some relaxation, I will deal better with the situation. If somebody else will be strict with it, to read all the material about vaccination, this will help him to cope better and he will feel better. This will be his way. So I think there's a variety of ways to use to cope with this crazy situation that we are living in these 2 years that I spoke about in my part. And what we need is a strong sense of coherence that will enable us to choose our way of dealing with the chaotic situation.
I'm a little bit in opposition to that, Shifra.
Thank you. I would like to have, sorry.
No, I want to hear the opposition, yes.
May I say a sentence?
Yes.
You see, the problem is we need a society where people with a lower sense of salutogenesis, of coherence, have the same chance as other people. I think it's very much we have to change our systems to be developed in a way that people with different kinds of senses of coherence can live there and can learn there and can develop there. Therefore, I think we should much more look at the system and what we have to change in the system and not always talk about making people more something. I'm a sociologist, of course, and therefore I don't like to change people. I like to change systems in a way that people can have a better kind of life.
Thank you. Sorry, I would really like Monica to give a question for the end of this podium. And there is a wonderful question appearing now on the chat for you, Monica. And this is the following. Antonovsky himself mentioned that the sense of coherence is not the only variable explaining the origins of health. Could one of the editors reflect on the most promising concepts of the salutogenic umbrella that potentially also may explain health and well-being? I think this fits to your latest book, Monica. If you like to answer.
Could you please say the question again? I didn't.
Okay.
It was very long.
Yes. What other concept than the SOC is promising among all the concepts in the salutogenic umbrella to potentially also explain health and well-being?
Okay, now I understand. I mentioned the book Health Promotion in Healthcare, New Vital Theories, Salutogenic Theories, that was published last year. And concepts that are explained in that book is meaning of life, not the same as Antonovsky's meaningfulness. There is quality of life, empowerment, many other concepts. I think we have to expand the understanding of salutogenesis and related concepts to get a broader application of salutogenesis.
Thank you, Monica, and sorry for taking 2 minutes longer than planned. Lenneke, please take over.
That's okay. I think before giving Georg the floor, Maurice, you wanted to comment. I saw your hand. Maurice, come in.
I wanted to comment on the question or the issue related to various kinds of alternative ideas about how to promote health and connections to salutogenesis. And I think that we have to divide that into two different aspects. The one aspect is a very general connection where people, unfortunately, sometimes are trying to legitimize or to increase legitimization of the therapy or the thing that they're interested in by connecting it to a hot theory. And salutogenesis, in a sense, is that hot theory for many people. This reminds me of the time about 20 years ago when empowerment was very, very hot. And you could go online and you could buy empowerment suitcases, empowerment umbrellas, and empowerment clothes, and so forth and so on. The other aspect, which is more interesting to me, is how one conceptualizes a connection between salutogenesis and alternative therapies, to use that term, in a scientific way as regards research. And I've got a little bit of experience with this in advising doctoral students recently, where there is an interest, for example, in a particular kind of yoga, Bikram yoga in this case, Bikram yoga. And then the question the student put to me was, in what way can this be conceptualized as being connected to salutogenesis? Because she was interested in making that connection. And our discussions led us to the idea that perhaps it needed to be thought of as GRR. And then one might consider in what ways this kind of yoga actually played a role in strengthening or building GRRs and so forth. So my answer to this is that I think we need to remember as a society that we're a society not to spread the gospel of salutogenesis, but we're a society to enhance the quality of theory and research on salutogenesis, and therefore always try to come back to those harder questions and stay away from the more popular, more generalized conceptions.
Thank you very much. A very nice addition, Maurice. That's a nice bridge also, I think, to Georg, where you would tell a little bit more about STARS and also the conference next year. Go ahead, Georg.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that makes absolutely sense what Maurice said now, and I will share my screen. So you should see that, Lenneke, now. Okay, very good. So this is actually our Society of Theory and Research on Salutogenesis, as you can see it when you go online. And I just would like to guide you briefly through that website in order to show you what kind of great benefits you have when you either join, if you are not a member yet, or when you're already a member, how you could make better use of your membership in the future. So as you see here on the front page, it is a transdisciplinary platform for scientific exchange on salutogenesis. So we are very open regarding disciplines, but already, as Maurice said, we really don't want to sell salutogenesis as a buzzword, but really advance this concept and its very profound application in diverse life situations. This is really what we aim for, and this is what you find here. What is really STARS about? We do have this mission that we want to advance and promote the science of salutogenesis. We really want to promote scientific exchange across disciplines in a transdisciplinary way. And really important, it's an open membership, so everyone can join. We only do a little quality check that people who are joining actually come from the academic world, or at least health promotion practice world, and not people who want to sell something. So we screen those out. So we really have a good membership base, I think, with really people who share our mission up here. And really most important really is that we follow a sharing principle. So STARS, I mean, on the one hand, we as the Center of Salutogenesis in Zurich, we are hosting that, but you really consider this as host, and you as members are the players and can enrich the STARS website and its different features in the future. And this is exactly what I would like to invite you to. Oh yes, sorry, I should tell you, If you are not a member yet, you could join. You would click up here. Now I'm logged in, so you can not but see it, but here would be the join button where you can join, or you can contact us with any issues, ideas you would like to make us aware of. And I really would like to highlight Martin, who is a very dear colleague in our team, who's really taking care of this whole website. So he will be your contact person for all more technical related stuff. Now, what else? You find certainly news and events, as in all good websites. And again, a sharing platform. I invite you to use that button, share news and events. Do not only read what's already announced, but come here. And that's so easy to use. You can just put in your name and what kind of news you would like to share here, put it in here. Then Martin will check it and put it online. The same for events. So it's really very low threshold. And I can only encourage you very strongly to make use of that, so more people know what's going on in your surroundings where you are active in the field. Then certainly conferences are the big thing to get broader discussion and engagement around salutogenesis. I hope many of you had the opportunity to take part in this previous conference we had last summer online, certainly. And now the big upcoming conference is our big world conference of IUHPE, which is really helping us a lot. IUHPE also running our global working group, and also the webinar today. And here we have two things to offer. On the one hand, we will have an interactive online pre-conference on May 15th on this topic of salutogenesis beyond health towards more coherent societies, addressing exactly the issues we started to discuss today, how we can really deal with more challenging, bigger societal issues such as conflicts, migration, planetary health, and so on. And the same topic we will dig into in the sub-plenary, achieving social justice through social coherent policy and practice. So please join us at this conference for a deeper exchange on this topic. Then membership, that's really interesting that you can, after you have joined here, also see who else is part of the group. And here find the whole list of members. And you can easily search now, for example, I come from Switzerland, so I can easily see who else in Switzerland is part of this group, and I can easily connect to others in that field in my own country. Or if I'm interested, as I am, in everyday settings, I enter that keyword, and then I see all people who say, indicate that as their primary interest in this group. And that's not a small group. We have 1,200 members by now. So it's really a great platform to find other people in your field, in your country, you would like to connect. Please join and make use of this great data base. And here you also can see the distribution of members across the different countries, which really cover 82 different countries for now. We certainly would like to expand that as well. Books and scales looks a little bit maybe on the first hand not so interesting, but what is behind it, you can really download this original works of Aaron Antonovsky as a PDF version. I think that's really very great. And even more important, maybe you have access to the different SOC scales in all these different languages which were mentioned. And here you need to request access. And behind all that, we have this great forum linked to that, which hopefully shows up. And here you can not only download these things, but here in that one existing forum, you can exchange your questions you have regarding how to measure SOC in different contexts, which scale to use, which language to access, where you can post this question here. And Avisha Antonovsky is really taking so much care with very deep energy and commitment and really responds very easily to all these different questions posed here. So really that's a big resource to really engage with now the kind of how should I say, observer of the scales, and he makes sure they are used in a proper way. So that's really a very, very important source. And most recently, today, we started with additional forum, or actually a few days ago, where you can continue the discussion where we just started today about where should we go in the future with salutogenesis and what should be added in the book. You can go in here and add your questions and thoughts also afterwards. And we as editors will regularly go here and engage with you on the different discussion points you might raise. So that was my overview. I dearly hope that you join us if you didn't do so, and really particularly become active here and share your news in events if you didn't do so yet. It's really a wonderful platform for exchange, and I welcome you here in the forum and other places in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Georg, also for this wonderful place where we can meet and see and ask all these questions, and everything you've set up there from Zurich. It's really fantastic to see how it's all developed and grown, and what a rich resource it's there. So compliments, thank you very much. So we're ending the seminar now. I would like to close the seminar, this webinar actually, but not before I say some final words to Maurice. Maurice, are you listening? Because I don't see your camera. You are listening. Good. Well, I wrote a little poem. Salutogenesis. Saluto what? Words mean little. What you, Maurice, do and who you are means a lot. That is salutogenesis. Inspiring, caring, making sense of what makes little sense, standing up for others, loving nature and the mountains, drinking alcohol-free beer, asking new questions, giving space for young generations and students, making a second handbook possible without being the shining star. But you are a star, a special star. Thank you for being you. Salutogenesis.
Thank you.
With these final words, I would like to thank everyone who participated in this webinar, and especially thank all the section editors for showing the salutogenic sparkles of the book. Goodbye, everyone.